So without any further ado, bringing the man himself, former announcer for WCW and TNA. We're going to bring it right now, Dave Penzer. Welcome, brother.
Hey, thank you so much. I don't think there's enough ways to follow you on social media. You guys need to get out there.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
We got all the areas covered, Dave.
Yeah, I see that. I see that. You got a fundraiser. You got Instagram and 42 Twitters. You got working hard.
What would you want us to call you, Dave, David, Mr. Penzer?
I've been in the wrestling business for almost 25 years. I'll answer to anything, but you can call me anything you want. I'm fine, Dave, David, whatever. I don't know if there ever was one particular one, actually. I think about it. I think people just called me what they felt like calling me, and I answered.
Well, shout out to the ambulance they rolled by. Hopefully, whoever they're going to is okay. Well, we always can call you like Tony Schiavone used to call you, Dave Penzer. You used to always put that off on your last name. I always wondered why that was. Not sure if you was aware of that, Dave.
Yeah, I was aware of it. Me and Tony were friends, and he was my boss, so I think it was just a little friendly jab. Hey, are you happy I said your name type of thing.
Was he the greatest boss in history? I know a lot of fans tend to pick with Schiavone, where they say it's the greatest match in wrestling history. Everything was the greatest in history. So was Tony Schiavone the greatest boss in history?
I don't know if I'd say greatest. He wasn't a bad boss. He was pretty laid back. There's a lot going on during that time, especially when it got crazy. So it was a lot of moving parts. Go ahead.
Well, he was one of the greatest contributors. He was one of the contributors to the greatest matches in history, and that was Mankind versus The Rock. So,
Is that the one where he gave away the finish?
Yeah.
Yes, he did.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he was. I'm pretty sure that even Eric Bischoff will tell you that he was told to do that by Eric. He didn't have anything against Mick Foley winning the title, but Tony wasn't that type of guy. But he was a company guy, and he did what he was asked to do. Because the guy pays his bills, sends him paychecks, or did. So I probably think that everybody involved wishes that never happened, but it did. So it's certainly fair to talk about. It worked for a while, giving away their finishes and stuff. It worked for a while, and I think though, you got to be careful who you pick on. It's one thing picking on, Vince McMahon and some of the, guys that the people don't like, but when you really hit on somebody or pick on somebody that they really like, then you're in trouble. So sometimes that kind of stuff could backfire on you, and it certainly did that night. Not only will it go down in infamy, but I think we lost 500,000 viewers or something. Turned the channel. Nothing like pimping your competition, huh?
Yeah.
Speaking of which, we are speaking of Bischoff. You mentioned that we're good friends with Eric Bischoff. We just finished what we were NXT Gameboy called a trilogy at Bischoff. We had 3 great 2-hour-plus interviews with him covering a lot of his career. And I wanted to ask you, Dave, starting off, what's your thoughts on Eric Bischoff as the boss and as working with him?
My thoughts on Eric actually are different than if you probably asked me the question 10, 12, 15 years ago. Eric was under a lot of pressure. Self-admittedly, he's not the friendliest, warmest guy in the world, and sometimes it was hard to get a read, if he appreciated what you did, because everybody's working so hard, and you get wrapped up in your own thing. You don't want to lose your gig. You're on the number 1 rated cable, television show, even if it's just as a ring announcer, which is one of the smallest cogs on the wheel. But you get, and then you start thinking, he walks by me with his head looking down, doesn't even say hello, and you could get all wrapped up in that, and I would be lying if I said I didn't to a point. I didn't let it consume me, certainly, but, now that I listen to what was going on and I think back to how crazy things were and how much pressure he had, and I listen to some of these interviews, like the ones he did with JBL, and he did one with Ric Flair on Flair's podcast, and I'd love to go back and listen to the ones he did with you guys, actually. But you sort of understand that he didn't have time to say hello, and he was probably thinking of the 42,000 things he had to do. So, I've gotten to talk to Eric. We did a Hogan and Friends show in Toronto a couple years ago. And Hogan and Hulk Hogan Uncensored. Eric was the opening, and I was the host. And me and Eric sat down and had some drinks, just probably because there was nobody else there because Hulk had left. And, it was just me and him. So instead of sitting by ourselves, we sort of just got to talking about our lives and where we're at now. And it was sort of like a nice ending to that whole, sort of like a nice, exclamation point at the end of the story, some type of thing. And, I'll wish him well on Twitter or something, and he'll say something back. And, it's sort of cathartic in a lot of ways, because back then when he was the boss and he was the one who, if you messed up and he was upset, you could get fired. And like I said, he wasn't the warmest guy around. And so that whole thing has been cathartic. But I look back and I can't imagine what he was going through, and now especially hearing the stories and all the problems that we were having, that we knew things were there was a problem, but we didn't know how bad the problem was. I certainly didn't know that what he did, and I'm kind of glad I didn't, because I probably would have started drinking alcohol on a daily basis or something. But
drinking alcohol.
So when you ask me what I think Eric did a lot of brilliant things. I think Eric got caught up in the moment and probably did some things he wishes he could take back. And I think a lot of Eric Bischoff. He's a hard worker. He's a creative guy. And looking back, I want to thank him for hiring me and believing in me. And sometimes you don't need a hello walking down the hall. The paycheck and the experiences you get on the road with the friends I made and the things I got to do with the people that were my heroes growing up, that was all I need. So, like I said, sometimes you get caught up in the heat of the moment, but, looking back, I have tons of respect for the guy.
You're not at a gunpoint when you're saying that, right?
No.
Yeah.
I've actually been, I sat and I listened to the JBL interviews because, I have the WWE network for $9.99 a month. And so I don't watch matches, and I don't, I like watching the historical pieces and, the interviews and stuff like that, and the podcasts that they do with Austin and Chris Jericho and stuff like that. So, I didn't listen to them when they aired live, but, went back after, about 11 o'clock at night, some nights where there was nothing on TV, and I put it on and listened to it before I went to bed. And, and also the one he did with Ric Flair, I actually sent a message on Twitter to Eric saying, it was fascinating to hear the behind-the-scenes story of what me were going through, but didn't realize that really all that was going on at the time, because it wasn't my place to know. I just knew that, there was problems, and ratings were down, and, people were no-showing the house shows and stuff like that. But I didn't know the details. And now that you know the details and you live through it, it's fascinating to look back and put the pieces together. Oh, I remember that. I didn't know that was why that happened, And so it's been fascinating to me, and I reached out to him on Twitter, and I appreciate the fact that he's so honest with everything, because it helps sort of fill the story that is WCW that I live, but I didn't live the details of exactly what happened. So it fills the gaps and the questions, and it's nice to have that after so long a time. So I hate to wax nostalgic about things, but that you're asking me a question, I'm giving you an honest answer, and I've really started to think about Eric, and I'd even love to have another conversation with him to let him know how much I appreciate what he did, and maybe down the road we'll meet each other on the road, and we can have that conversation. It'd be fun.
Wax on, brother.
I tell with Dusty passing, bless him, and Roddy passing, bless him, and some of these interviews we're hearing where stories are starting to come out. I've been waxing nostalgic a lot lately. It's kind of you kind of have to, because we're starting to lose some of the most instrumental people in the history of this business, and it's just to the point where we're getting to that age. I knock on wood, I had a stent put in a couple of years ago. I ended up having a 99% blockage in what they call the widowmaker artery. So I certainly easily could have been, and I was asymptomatic, which means you don't have any symptoms. So it was just a fluke that they found it, and so I could have been, if there is a heaven up there, and I hope there is, I could have been up there with them. I'd rather be down here now with my kids and my family for as long as I have. But now I'm even waxing more nostalgic. I need a drink. No, I'm kidding.
you
getting all sentimental here. I didn't expect that. I really didn't. But you never know where the conversation's going to lead you.
We're powerful here. Now, you keep mentioning drinking, Dave. You got to tell us what is your choice of beverage.
I'm a vodka and Sprite guy. That's all I really drink. I hate beer. I'm not a wine person. I'm not a whiskey guy. I'm a vodka and Sprite, vodka and orange juice guy, and I've always been a vodka guy on the road. I never really got caught up in the in anything else, but it's after you come off of a show and your adrenaline's pumping and it's 11:30 at night, it's nice to have. I'm not gonna lie to you, it's nice to have a couple cocktails and kind of bring you back down. And I always went for the vodka. I'm a Smirnoff man.
Smart man.
Nothing fancy for me.
Well, the car they drink the Penzer. Say vodka and Sprite.
There you go. I actually, when I'm at home, I drink vodka and Diet Sprite, so I don't get as fat as I am already. But it's hard when you get older keeping that weight off, man. I'll tell you what.
Turn it over to NFC Gameboy.
Say this. I'm glad that you enjoyed the JBL interview with Bischoff. If you enjoyed that, like most of the fans out here listening would enjoy, you're definitely going to enjoy our interview, which is so compelling. My question.
Yeah, I'm going to listen to it, and I just want to make clear I am a wrestling fan. I got to live the dream and make a decent paycheck from it, and get to know a lot of the guys that some of the fans don't get to know on a friendly basis. But I'm a fan, always have been, always will be. So when you talk about the wrestling fans, please include me. I'm no different.
Oh, no doubt.
I just sent it to you about 5 minutes ago. All three of them.
Okay, cool. I'll be listening. I'll let you know what I think, but I'm sure it'll be fascinating. It's really, especially reliving something like I said earlier that you were a part of. It's really kind of cool to get the inside story. So I look forward to it. Thank you.
Well, we take a lot of credit for saying, and if Eric or anybody with Eric is listening, you probably can call us out on this. We take a lot of credit for saying that we kind of help the Eric Bischoff train as elite go out the station, because when we first got Eric and we got the stories and everything down packed, as we kind of snowballed it from there, and we start seeing Eric into a lot of things. And not saying that he didn't do what he did, but what we're saying is, as of late, he has came on our show and he has blessed us with a lot of great stories, and he himself have came back many times because he wanted to come back because he enjoyed the show so much, and we were just ecstatic that he would enjoy it. And we thank you for understanding what we now know, because Eric Bischoff, the Eric Bischoff I know was the crazy tyrant that was trying to destroy WWE or WWF at that time, and to hear how mellow and how he's changed, it really is fascinating. But back to you, D. And you mind if I call you D?
I told you I'll answer anything.
I know you said it, but I'm a gentleman. I like to ask permission anyway, even though you said that's all I ask. But
it's fine. I was at my son's college football game, D3 college football game this weekend, and his teammates were calling him JP for Jarrett Penzer. So he called me DP for David Penzer.
Okay, I'm not going to say DP only because DP can mean a lot of things in the community of people that I hang around with. So I'm just going to stick with D. But we all
it's amazing how we go. It's amazing how we go from waxing nostalgic to potential double penetration talk.
Yeah.
I'm digging this show too. I'm digging this show too. This is fun.
Well,
yeah.
Dave,
my question to you is that we're working at WCW and working with TNA. You got two different types of environments. You got one that was the highlight of the 90s, and you got the other one that pretty much was the highlight, or some of the highlight of the 2K with their growing audience with the social media and everything. How was the back as far as the bosses and stuff in that environment that you were in? How was it so different? Because a lot of people that we interviewed saying that it was much, much different in WCW than it is in TNA. So how was the environment with being in WCW and TNA in your experience?
Well, you have to understand, you get a guy who had a childhood dream of somehow working in the wrestling business and is able to succeed in that. And if you're not a wrestler, if you're not an athlete, and you're not educated, like to be a television producer or a play-by-play analyst or something like that, there's not a lot of paying jobs in the wrestling business. And the easiest one to kind of do, if I'm being honest, is to be a ring announcer. You talk on a microphone. Not everybody could do it, but you have to have the personality, certainly. I'm not taking anything away from ring announcing, but if you're saying I'd love to be in the wrestling business and I'm not athletic or trained to do anything else, make me the ring announcer. So I always had in the back of my head that I finally got to this dream. I moved my family to Atlanta. I'm making decent money. I'm getting, traveling the world at Turner's expense. And who knows who's going to get a high position in Turner Broadcasting, whose son or niece or nephew or best friends, brothers, whatever, wants to be the ring announcer. So I always tried to do a lot of different things to diversify myself, but I always kind of worried, if I'm being totally honest, about, losing everything that I had gotten. And then we started taking off and doing what we did in professional wrestling with the 40,000 people for Monday Night Show and sold out 6 months in advance and all the things we were doing. And you start to worry, this is so fun. I don't want the ride to be over. So, there's always a little bit of self-doubt. And so I always had, and I didn't have anything to fall back on, quite frankly, if I'm being honest, at the time. So, it's a lot of pressure. There was a lot of pressure in that job. I had a lot of fun, but there was a lot of pressure. When I went to TNA, I owned a pretty successful company. I was one of the partners of a pretty successful company in running the day-to-day operations. So this was just, for me, it was extra money. It was time to spend around the boys. And, not to say I wasn't worried that it was going to end, because the extra money was really nice and the hanging around the boys was very nice, but that pressure wasn't there. I also knew that because they were in Nashville and I was in Tampa and I couldn't move, that, in WCW I always tried upward mobility. At the very end of WCW, before it went away, I was assistant talent relations director. I was sitting in booking meetings, giving ideas, taking notes. Who knows what would have happened if WCW was still around today? I'd like to think I'd be a senior vice president or something. I was kind of just beginning to be on the fast track, if I'm being honest. And not to say that couldn't all go away 2 years later, but I'm just saying, it'd be interesting to see it play out, but it'll never happen. In TNA, I knew there was no upward movement. Now, I would have loved to have been able to work with them behind the scenes, but I had a business to run, so it wasn't going to happen. So there was a lot less pressure on me. I'd go in, I'd do my gig, go to the bar, that's a recurring theme in this, is drinking. I might pour myself a drink in a minute. But, go to the bar, hang out with Mike Tenay and Don West and Flair at the end, and Keith Mitchell, who's Red River Pete, who's the producer and was for WCW as well, Big Tilly and Bruno, and sometimes Dusty the Dream would be there. And, it wasn't as much pressure. I didn't take it for granted, certainly, but, it was a different mindset. I had something, that wasn't my main source of income. So, as far as working for different people, Jeff, when I worked for Jeff Jarrett, when Jarrett was sort of my go-to, Jeff is a friend, so I didn't feel any pressure to go to Jeff and say, hey, why are we doing this? Or, hey, do you mind if I'm late to this? Or, because I have a conference or a convention, So when Jeff went away, for whatever reason he went away, and I was working with Dixie was fine. It wasn't a big deal. It was just I was a ring announcer that came in from Tampa and did my shtick and gave away backstage passes that weren't really backstage passes, and did the deal I was hired to do. So it was just a totally different mindset. It was a lot less pressure to do the TNA gig, and a lot. I don't want to say more enjoyable, because that would be a lie. It wasn't more enjoyable, but it was a lot less pressure on myself.
Thank you so much for sharing that, man. I greatly appreciate that, and for breaking down.
It's actually a great question.
Oh, thank you. To piggyback off that question, to ask you another thing, you said that when you was at WCW, you was in booking meetings, you had a lot more to contribute, and when you was at TNA, you was already in partnership with another business and stuff. Did you ever get any type of offers from WWE, or did you yourself try to go to WWE with your talents, being that you were so recognizable in both WCW and TNA? Did you ever try that also?
Well, when WCW closed, the plan was, and I don't know how much of this you know, so if I'm being redundant, let me know, but the plan was for it to be run as a separate brand. So they wanted the WCW ring announcer and the WCW referees and the WCW talent. But then what happened, and so I interviewed with Jim Ross right after WCW closed. He interviewed all the staff, whether it was a producer or a ring announcer or talent relations, whatever it was. He interviewed everybody who wanted a potential job in WWE that wasn't a wrestler. And he was set up in a hotel room in Buckhead and just had 15-minute, 20-minute meetings all day for weekends, for weeks at a time. But he was nice enough to meet with me. He told me that was the plan. He told me that they didn't see why they wouldn't use me as a ring announcer, but that they were far away from implementing the plan because it all happened rather quickly. So what happened was, I'm not 100% sure of this, but I'm 99, and Eric might even be able to tell you. But what I think happened was they soon realized that they didn't have the talent that they thought they were going to have because all these guys, WWE I'm talking about, all these guys had guaranteed contracts, and they didn't want to walk away from them. So the Goldbergs and the Flairs and the Diamond Dallas Pages and the Booker T went, sorry, my bad, and the Scott Steiners and all these people that were the main event, Hulk Hogan's, Kevin Nash, Scott Hall, they weren't walking away from their multi-million-dollar contracts until they got paid because they were guaranteed to get their money. Didn't matter. So all of a sudden they realized, do we have the talent to run it as a separate brand? And I think the answer was no. And if you remember correctly, in Seattle, Washington, they put on a Buff Bagwell versus Booker T as the main event as a WCW match, and it bombed for several reasons. Number one is that wasn't the top, Booker T aside, that wasn't the top talent that people were expecting WCW to be. It wasn't the Hogans and the Flairs and the Goldbergs and the Skyners and that. And also because we never played in Seattle. We weren't really big in Seattle, so I don't think fans in Seattle really knew who Booker T and Buff Bagwell were for the most part, not WWE fans. Because if you remember correctly, there were WCW fans that just got into WCW because of the NWO and the high-flying wrestling and the Nitro parties. Then there were WWE fans that had been WWE fans, and then later fans of the Attitude Era. There were two distinct fan bases. So if you weren't WCW fans and you threw on in Buff Bagwell versus Booker T as the main event of WCW Raw, they shit the house up, and it wasn't their fault necessarily. And I think and what I later heard was that when they had a production meeting for the Buff Bagwell versus Booker T match, Vince McMahon actually said, the question was raised, who's going to ring announce that match? And Vince McMahon actually said, well, who's WCW's ring announcer? And somebody said, I think Johnny Ace said Dave Penzer. He said, well, Dave Penzer here. And they said, no, Dave Penzer's not here. Nobody thought about it to bring him. And they said, and they finally had Stacy Keibler do it. Interestingly enough, the next week, Raw was in Atlanta, where I lived. So I got invited by John Laurinaitis to come by. He told me the story about Vince asking for a WCW ring announcer and said, well, this time I could tell him you're here. There's no guarantees, but why don't you come down? So I went and I said hello to a bunch of guys, and I got to meet Howard Finkel for the first time. It was very, very, very nice to me, and sat and talked to me for almost an hour. And the production meeting went longer and longer and longer, and I'm waiting for John Laurinaitis or Arn Anderson to come out, or Fit Finley, and say, hey, yes, you're going to be ring announcing, or no, it didn't work out. Well, finally they came out, and they said we're going in a different direction, and that's when they combined ECW with WCW against WWE. And by then they had abandoned making WCW a separate product. So that was the end of that. So that's maybe a little bit behind the scenes insight. I don't know. I don't think I've ever told that story before. But
question real quick.
Then right before I went to TNA, about 2 years before I went to TNA, when my company was really taking off, I got a call from talent release from human resources in WWE, and they said we're having a new position. It's going to be a arena host. It's not going to be. There's still going to be a ring announcer, but there's going to be an arena host, and we want you to interact throughout the night, before the show, after the show, interact with the fans, make the fans a part of the show, walk around the building, have contests, blah, blah, blah. And they asked me to write a detailed show outline of the things that I'd implement, the interactive things. And I did a 3-page outline of all these different things. A fan could hold the title. A fan, start the show moving 2 people who got a trivia question right from the balcony to the front 2 seats. And I interwove all these different things. They called me and they said they like what you wrote. We're going to fly you up first class to WWE headquarters, Titan Towers at the time. And you're going to meet with Jim Ross. You're going to meet with John Laurinaitis. You're going to meet with Big for John Gaborik, who is pretty high up in television. You're going to meet with Ed Cohen, who is the head of arena booking. And so they flew me up there first class, picked me up in a town car, took me up to Stamford, got to tour Titan Towers, got to tour the television production facility, met all these people. They talked about me. Later found out that Dean Malenko is the one who had recommended me for the job, which I really appreciated. So then after my meetings, I went to the HR person, and she said, all right, well, I'll give you a call, but it looks good. So she called me later that week and said, you're hired. We just have to figure out if you're going to be a salaried employee or if you're going to be a nightly employee. At the time, I rather would have been nightly because I had my other business. But I said whatever works is cool. So, I thought it was cool that I got the red carpet tour of Titan Towers and, see the place and all that. It's a beautiful place. And B, I thought there's a really, really good, chance I had a job up there, doing what I love to do and back on the road again. I wasn't quite sure how I was going to spin it to my business partners, but it never ended up being a problem because I went on a cruise that Christmas for my parents' 40th wedding anniversary, my whole family, and I got off the cruise ship and I had a message. I think her name was Heather from HR, give me a call. So I called her and I said, so do I have the job? She said, unfortunately, Vince McMahon decided to move this entire thing in a new direction. So even though we love what you did and we wanted to offer you a job in that spot, we no longer have that spot available. And what I later found out is that was when he started putting Eric and Teddy Long on the road as the general managers out on the house shows. He decided if he was going to have to pay for another plane ticket to have a host, so to speak, why not use the general managers he already had under contract instead of paying another guy to do it? So I sort of lost the job before I got it. But those are the only two times I've ever had any discussions about working with WWE. And unfortunately, neither of them happened, and none of it was because of me. It was both things that were totally out of my control. So.
God damn. Thank you so much, Dave. Man. No, I'm dead serious. I want to thank you because a lot of times when we have guests and we talk about the inner workings inside of how a lot of bookings, contracts, and stuff, especially at the time with the Invasion Angle and when Vince McMahon bought, WCW, ECW, and everything, a lot of stuff kind of just got thrown out there, and you really didn't understand what was going on from a business standpoint. We just know as fans watching, he bought the competition, and that was it. But as what you later found out was that he was trying to really build WCW as his own company. He was actually trying to make his own type of competition. And, a lot of times we always the WWE need competition. They need competition. Well, he tried to build competition, and he couldn't do it. And I don't know if that was kind of flattering to him and the company, or it's kind of like the curse. So it's kind of like gift of curse type thing, because now we got what we have, and a lot of times I don't really call it entertaining anymore. I mean, they do wrestle on TV. I noticed that, but I'm not entertained anymore. And, I feel is that if you're an entertainment company, your main goal should to be entertaining. And the WWE, to me, nowadays, is just not really entertaining. And I'm not trying to knock it. I'm just calling it like it is. I feel like back then they were trying to be entertaining because they had people against them. They had companies against them. They had their backs against the wall. But when you're comfortable, and this is in any job, in any position, and fans, if you're listening, if you of age and you work, and you're comfortable at your position, you don't strive to do better or to push your job or your company or whatever type of position you're in, then think about it. Someone's going to come and try to do more than what you're doing to take your job away from you. So how come when we ask people, do they think the WWE or can a company come and take it down? Everyone says no. They're a global phenomenon and no one can do it. No one has the money. Because we asked Eric Bischoff, and Eric said no. I flat out, I don't think that no one has the money to do what they do. Now he said if it's going in a different direction, he think that he would be all for it, and someone probably can get away with it. But what the WWE does, he said no. He thinks that they are the top of the echelon, and to know that he actually tried to build something out of it, it's kind of sad, because I would love to see WCW have his own brand, just like I would love to see ECW as his own brand, because a lot of guys nowadays on the roster that and you probably seen or met, and we see every week, and we've met and everything, and they just get shuffled around, and it's sad. It really is sad. They had this thing at Madison Square Garden on the network. Did you see it, D?
No.
Oh, God.
Okay. And, I watched it, and I didn't watch it live, of course. I watched it later on the network, and I watched it, and it felt like a Monday Night Raw. It didn't feel like it was something epic. It didn't feel like it was emotional. It felt like just something every day. And I believe that these corporations and stuff, when they have guys such as yourself, who they slowly put in these different positions to build, and that was the key thing I noticed that you said, and I was glad to hear it. At WCW, they was setting it up for you to build. They're not allowing these guys to build. They just telling them do what we tell you to do, and that's it. If you build with the company, you're going to stay the extra hours. You'll put your family maybe on a little bit on hold or something. Or if you're feeling sick, you might not feel as sick as you think you are, because you want to make sure the job is done. Because you're building.
I never missed a gig in WCW. Never. I showed up with 103 fever, and I'm not trying to be some martyr, but it's just a fact. And I was so consumed with the business side of pro wrestling, the booking and the talent relations and all that I would have spent every waking hour doing that. But that's just, I don't know that that's conducive to what WWE's doing today or not doing today. That's just a kid who is obsessed with the business, who wanted to go as far as he possibly could go and experience as much as he possibly experienced. And I don't know, if there's a lot of those out. I'm not around the WWE in any way, shape, or form, obviously, so I really don't know what goes on behind the scenes and how motivated the people are. I'm not exactly sure. And what you said earlier, I don't know if Vince wanted to make a WCW a touring brand so much as competition. He might have, or whether he just wanted he thought he could get another revenue stream. He saw WCW earn $35 million on TBS. If you could get these guys back on TV, which he was trying to do, and you could get these guys back on the road, and I could have my WWE and my WCW, and he sort of accomplished that now. Triple H has with NXT. They went from having a money losing proposition to build new talent to a potential. I don't think it's there yet. Second revenue stream. For them. So. I sometimes it's less about the competition and more about the extra money that comes in. But competition's great for everything, and TNA tried. They used to say, well, if we were only on live, so then they put them on live. Well, if we were only on live on Monday nights head to head with Raw, and they gave them that. Well, if we only were live head to head with against Raw with Hulk Hogan and Ric Flair and Eric Bischoff and all these guys, and then they got those guys, and they couldn't. It just wasn't. It wasn't. For whatever reason. I'm not even saying the shows were bad. I don't think they were back then. I think there was some good stuff going on. I still watch that Jay Lethal and Ric Flair head-to-head stuff, and I still laugh my rear end off on the internet.
Yes.
I see it pop up on Twitter a lot, and every time I watch it and I laugh, and I've seen it probably 20 times. There was some good stuff going on, but by then WWE was so entrenched as the place to go on Monday night, and so it's just hard. I mean, you can't say now, well, what if I had a promotion with Hulk and Sting and Flair and Bischoff and Nash and Hall, and we were live head to head on Monday nights, because I think we could do what we did on Monday Night Show. Well, you know what? They tried for whatever reason, different times. Whatever the reason is, they couldn't get the, maybe it's just they didn't have enough time to let it play out. I can't tell you the reason, but they gave it their best try. No matter what happens to TNA, and I wish them the best moving forward. They got the chance to do what they wanted to do, and they, for whatever reason, and I'd love to hear interviews on your show 5 years from now with Dixie Carter and Jeff Jarrett and Terry Taylor and Vince Russo and all these people that were involved to see what was going on in the back. Because while I'm there, I'm not privileged to the behind the scenes meetings and the politics and the what Spike TV had to say about it, and how happy they were with what was going on, how much they were putting up to get some of these guys. So eventually those stories will come out, and again, it'll be fascinating to be able to hear the behind-the-scenes truths. But, they had their chance, and that may be the one time that anybody else ever has a shot to go head-to-head against Monday Night Raw with the heavy hitters that you need.
Jen?
Go ahead, Shen.
Jen, are you there? Okay, let's get to the callers then.
Well, yeah, he's bringing the callers. I'm not sure. Shen, if you can call
Thanks,
back.
Dave. We appreciate that.
We're going to bring in one of our good old buddies, Cheeky. Welcome to Unlimited Radio with Dave Penzer.
My question for Dave is, were you ever offered a tuxedo match when you were doing your announcement? Because I know Howard Finkel was specialist at those types of wrestling matches, and if so, who would have you liked to wrestle in a tuxedo match?
No, I never was. That's a good question. I never was offered a tuxedo match. I'll still do one. Go get the Fink and let's do one up in the Legends of the Ring convention or something. But no, I'm just joking. It would be horrifying to see a tuxedo match at 50 and 49 and however old Howard is. Bless him, he's the best of all time. My prediction: he's the only ring announcer in the history of professional wrestling to have a Hall of Fame ring, and deservedly so. But no, I never was. The closest I got sort of was that angle with the short angle to turn Chris Jericho heel that we kind of did on the fly on our own. Not on our own, but kind of, it was our idea. Mostly Chris's, a little bit mine. And where he ripped off my jacket and gave me back another one the next week and did it again when he lost. And that was about the closest, but we never got a tuxedo match with me and Jericho. I don't think anybody would buy into that.
Okay.
And my final question is, were you ever given, the results of the matches, or did they keep that pretty quiet?
It depended. Mostly it was on the formats. If there was a big surprise or if there was a high-profile match that they didn't want to get out, like a Sting versus Hulk Hogan, it would just say finish to be determined, TBD. So if it was a TBD, that meant that we would find out when we found out, and that they would tell us in our headsets anything we needed to know before we needed to say something or do something that might be out of the ordinary. But most of the time it was just on there. It would say say La Parka and Psychosis versus Conan and Rey Mysterio. It would say the producer's name, the referee's name, time, and then it'd have a little bit of what happens in the match, and then at the end it'd be winners, and they'd say Conan, Rey Mysterio. Most of the time we knew.
Okay. Thanks,
Steve.
That's not a bad question either, because a lot of people that are in the wrestling business assume that the fans that are smart, they call them smart, whatever you want to call them, that are interested, that want to know what happens behind the scenes, know. Just and sometimes you don't. It was a different time, but I remember the first time I ever entered a building as a ring announcer, a small little city in Florida for an indie show. I didn't know, and I had been following wrestling. I had been around the boys at some of the TV tapings that this promotion did, and I didn't know what to expect. I knew it wasn't really real, but I didn't know if the guys were friends with each other, if they didn't hang out with each other, if they were feuding. I had no idea. So, some people might roll their eyes at that question, but unless you're reading a format, you don't know. That said, there are formats for both shows that are available on the internet, so it's not too hard to find out these days if they do mark down the winners. But it wasn't until I saw Corporal Kirshner and the Iron Sheik give each other a big hug in the locker room and telling each other what they were doing and how they were, that I realized that they're all really friends. But yeah, you just never knew at that time. It was a different world.
Wow, that's great.
For that. No, Dave.
And then a light bulb went off in my head. I felt kind of dumb at the time. But.
Dave, I know you did work. How was your time doing voiceover work for the Legends of Wrestling video games?
That was fun. It was an honor to be asked to do that. I went in. I got flown, I think, to California somewhere. Went into a studio for the whole day. Read different names and different sayings and different intros in different tones. I just basically did what they told me to do. They paid me nicely, and then they flew me back, and it was an honor to be included in that. And to, my kids were very young when WCW closed, so until in between that and TNA, they really didn't know what Daddy did, and so I got to bring that home and they could play the video game with me introducing the guys. So that was sort of cool for them. They were at that age where they got a kick out of that. So, and anytime you're asked to do anything at this point, it's an honor. My time has come and gone. I'm too old to offer anything, as far as, I still have talent, but, it's a young man's business, and I'm not a young man. If Justin Roberts is hardly doing anything, a young guy, with a lot of talent, who wants an older guy with a lot of talent. I got a lot to offer behind the scenes, but I just, I got stuff, I don't expect anybody's going to ever want to pay me to offer that because they got their own people. But, so anytime anybody asks me to do anything, I've gotten involved with the Legends of Wrestling that did City Field show, and we're working on another big one coming up with a lot of big legends. And so I've gotten involved with them, and it's an honor to work for them. And anybody else, that asked me to do something, whether it's, even to do a podcast. I'm honored to I don't want to sound like I'm sucking up, guys, because I'm not. I'm just saying, there was a time that nobody cared about the stories that David Penzer had to say, and that was fine. I was good with it. And now it's sort of a resurgence with Twitter and all that, and people seem to be interested in hearing the stories, and I enjoy telling them, and I think some of them at least are entertaining. So it's nice to be, smally, what's the word I'm looking at? A little bit relevant again. So, it's just, it's just if I'm being honest, it's, you realize your time is over doing that particular thing. You're honored to have done it and to go meet the people that you met and experience the things that you did. Again, we're back to waxing nostalgic. I don't know how we always get back there. Let's talk about double penetration. But no, I'm kidding. But, so when you're asked to go back to do that, when in your mind you're already done, it's sort of cool. I guess I was long-winded on that. I apologize. But, trying to express what I feel when somebody, has the time of day to want to talk to me or hire me, to do something.
I have a question.
Sure.
Real quick, I want to, and no pun intended, Tech, I wanted to ask you about your family. To stop about wrestling and your work with ring announcing for a minute. Let's get to your family. And you got your children. You said that your son is in college now, correct?
I got 2 in college as of this fall. So we've been empty nesters for about 6 weeks now.
Congratulations to you. I got a long way to go. My oldest is 12.
Oh, wow. It goes by quick, man. It really does. I said to my wife the other day, we were watching my son play football this weekend, and he first played when he was 5. The coach at the time at the flag football, it was in Peachtree City, Georgia, told all the kids, if you see the ball come out, just sit on it. So he was 5 years old, and he'd kill me for telling this story, but it was about 20 degrees outside, and 9 o'clock in the morning playing a flag football game, and he had his little uniform on, and the ball came out, and he sat on the football. And the coach just laughed and said, well, he did what I told him to do. But, now I'm watching him play Division III football, and he's been, playing in Little League and Rec League and high school and now college, and we never thought that was going to happen because, unfortunately, he has a little bit of my athletic ability, mostly my wife's side of the family that's athletic, but a little bit of my non-athletic ability. But and then I have a son at USF in the computer engineering program and 2 boys. And so we're empty nesters now, and like I said, time has flown by. But they're 2 totally different kids. You can't be more polar opposite, but both really great kids, and I'm proud of both of them. So, And the oldest one actually is kind of digging wrestling now. He likes NXT and Ring of Honor, and gets the little news updates on his cell phone. What's going on. Sort of fascinated by what happens, behind the scenes, and why is this guy not getting a push, and why is Dolph Ziggler never get it? Why are they pushing Roman Reigns so hard? Sorry, Roman, you're a great guy, but I'm just what my son says. So it's sort of fun to see what I saw when I was a young kid through his eyes. And he even at one point had reached out to Dory Funk Jr. and thought about going to wrestling school, and my wife adamantly said, absolutely not. Frankly,
let me ask you one last question before I send it back to Tech, because I know our time is short.
Yeah, I know. I'd love to come back, guys. This is fun.
Oh, no problem, man. No problem. Yeah. My last question to you is that if there was one experience, and real quick, if there was one experience that you would want your sons to saw or understand while you were in the wrestling business within your tenure, what would it be? What was one experience that you wish they could at least saw or, through your eyes that you think?
There were so many, and it's hard to pick out one. But I'll tell you what. This is a funny thing, but probably not the answer you would think. But when I was a kid, we grew up watching. I'll make this quick. I know you got to go. Grew up watching championship wrestling from Florida Championship Wrestling, and Dusty Rhodes was the big star, and he was bigger than anybody, any football player or mayor or governor in the state of Florida at the time. And Harley Race was the touring world champion. And my dad used to take me to the matches. My dad's a psychologist. He had no interest in wrestling. He would bring 3 magazines to the matches, and while we're sitting ringside for professional wrestling and people are bleeding and doing what they're doing, he'd be reading, all these different magazines, Psychology Today. We used to joke with him about it. But he sort of always liked Harley Race because Harley Race was a tough guy. And he sort of always got a kick about Harley Race. So when I got into business, my dad, I think for my dad, the question of if I made it was, did you ever talk to Harley Race? Did you, and so, because that was the guy he actually watched for whatever reason. I don't even know that there was a reason. Well, whenever we would go to Kansas City when I got the gig, Harley would invite all the guys to a barbecue at his house for the afternoon before the matches. Get there about 11, and big for him and BJ, his late wife, who was great. Would put out a big spread, and we'd go down to his basement and play pool in his pool room and tell stories. And I was asked to go several times. Harley invited me, and BJ and Harley became friends. And I think my dad saw me do a lot of things, and and got to see me do a lot of cool things. And I think the one thing I'd want my kids to see was how proud my dad was when I told my dad that I got to be invited and participated and be a guest at Harley Race's barbecue with all the guys, with Ric Flair and Ron Simmons and Sting and the Steiners and all those guys. And I think I could see in his face he had he nodded his head like that's really good, like you finally made it, kid. So I think that's the one thing that sort of I knew I finally made it if it all ended the next day. And it seems trivial, a barbecue at Harley Race's house, but if you're living life through my eyes and my family's eyes, that was actually a big deal. So that would have to be the answer. But it's I could probably think of 10 more things in 10 minutes, that I would love to see them do. But that's a great question, man. You got some good questions.
Thank you very much, man. Really appreciate it. Tech.
Actually, too, Dave. You being a ring announcer, you had to sit through a lot of pay-per-views. If you can, tell us real quick, some of the worst experiences or worst pay-per-views or events where you just didn't enjoy it. You're just like, oh my gosh, I know we're fans, but tell us any times when you sat through a pay-per-view or a Nitro or a wrestling event, you just was like, this is bad, or you just clearly saw the fans weren't into it.
I don't know that I could think of a pay-per-view. I'll be honest with you. Ed Ferrara is a friend of mine. We don't talk hardly ever, but whenever we see each other, give each other a big hug and, catch up, sort of like the Iron Sheik and Corporal Kirshner did in the dressing room in front of my eyes. But, and Vince Russo's a nice enough guy, I guess. I mean, he never did anything bad to me, and that's how I judge a person. But when they came in and they were doing some of the things they did, some of the characters that they came up with, General Erection and making Booker T. I don't even remember what they called him. I announced them what they told me to announce, but I just rolled my eyes and, nothing personal, Vince and Ed, if you're hearing this, but, you're great people, but I just thought those ideas were so out there that it was going to take a lot for us to ever come back, if we could come back down to down to earth, because there was some crazy stuff, and, that Misfits and stuff like that, and, some of the stuff that they did was really, really out there, and, it's not nothing personal against them. It's just, it just wasn't my cup of tea. I'm sure there's probably people that liked it, and I'd like to meet those people. The two of them. I'm joking. It just wasn't. Hey, it wasn't my cup of tea, man. It wasn't for me. So that's I can't really name a certain pay-per-view. I can name I can name you the better things that I remember, the things I positively remember, but I can't really tell you specifically the negatives, except for a lot of that stuff was not what I was into.
That's fine. Well, you say we thank you much for coming on to the show. We definitely will do a part 2 with you. And then we'll dedicate probably the whole hour, even whole show for you, so we can talk more about your career in WCW and TNA. Take this time out to do what we call a plug party. Go in and plug how to get in touch with you via social media.
I don't have that many people, and I seem to lose more than I gain. I don't really get Twitter. Maybe y'all could give me some hints. I don't want to tweet ridiculous, stupid things. I'd rather tweet intelligent things, and so that means I don't tweet all day, every day. And so I think some people go in and defriend me or whatever you call it, erase me, whatever. But if you want to come along for the ride, it's not going to be a lot of things, but I answer every question, as soon as I can. Anybody that's ever said they've asked me a question, I answer every question off of Twitter. It's at David Penzer, all one word. I have a Facebook fan page, WCW David Penzer at Facebook. That I post like some pictures of me with different celebrities and different experiences. But I've just been really busy in my real job, and I just don't get a lot of time, and I don't want to waste anybody's time by posting stupid things. But if you're not expecting a lot and you want to join in, I'd love to have you.
Okay.
We thank you much for that. If you can, take a little drink of the Penzer for us. She said vodka and Sprite. Take a little shot of that for us.
I may go pour one. I may go pour one, man.
That is the actual name. That drink doesn't have an official name, so you're going to call it the Penzer now.
I don't know if that's a good legacy, but I'll take it. How about that?
Well, we thank you much for your time. We will be contacting you soon off air, and we'll have you back on very soon. Thanks much.
All right, hey, I'll be honest with you. I had a blast. It was a lot of fun. I hope you guys enjoyed it.
Okay,
no problem, man. And tell us what you think about those interviews, D.
I will. I got a lot. I've been out of town for 5 days. And so I got a lot of catching up to do, but as soon as I get caught up, I'll listen to them and let you know what I think. If they're half as interesting as the JBL ones and the Ric Flair one, it'll be brilliant. So.
All right then. Well, thank you, man. We really appreciate it.
And if they're more interesting, then I'll have to buy you some Penzers.
Hey, we're for that. We're for that. Thank you much for your time, Dave. We'll talk to you soon.
Right. See you later. Bye.
Thank you.